Thank you, Gary, very much. While Western leaders look for a consensus on a military strike, the people of Syria are also weighing in on the prospect of U.S.-led military strike against their already war-torn nation. Anti-American protests erupted in Damascus on Monday as hundreds of Syrians took to the streets carrying flags, posters, and chanting anti-U.S. slogans. With us via Skype from Damascus is Syrian journalist Alaa Ebrahim. He has worked for a variety of news agencies within Syria. Alaa, thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you this question. I don't know that it's clear to Americans where the public sentiment lies in proportion to the amount of Syrians that do not want U.S. intervention and the proportion of Syrians who would like for U.S. to intervene.
Well, first of all, let us speak about the fact that the majority of the people living in Syria, regardless of their political affiliation, whether they are with or against the Syrian government, they wouldn't like to see an American intervention in their country because we have a very bad image of what America does when it goes into countries. We have the experiences of Iraq, we have the experiences of Afghanistan to look at. And as a result, Syrians, regardless of their political affiliation, many of them might be against the Syrian government, but at the same time would refuse an American strike against their country. We understand, as people who live in Damascus and who travel across Syria, that American strikes means a blackout for us, no electricity. It would mean shortages in food and medicine. It would mean more shortages in gas and fuel for our cars. So basically, any Syrian who lives inside Syria would tell you that they don't want an American strike because it would further complicate their daily lives. Of course, that being said, there are certain people inside Syria who would have been calling upon the United States to intervene in Syria militarily for some time now, because they feel that would help advance their cause against the Syrian government and help them bring down the Syrian government from power. But the fact remains those are not the majority, and anyone who lives inside Syria would prefer a stable daily life in comparison with an American intervention against his country.
Understandable. I have to say I'm a little bit surprised to hear you say that, because particularly this year, as there has been an escalation in the civil war and a call for help, particularly humanitarian aid, there was a lot of, as I understood it, criticism that the U.S. wasn't doing something, particularly to help those millions of refugees. So your answer is a little bit surprising to me. Let me ask you this, though. What is the level of fear there in terms of normal daily life? I read reports that there are some Syrians who are now beginning to sleep outside and change their lifestyle in anticipation of a missile strike.
Yes.
How widespread is that?
Let me point out one thing relating to the refugees. Yes, many people call upon the United States for more help, especially the Syrian opposition would like the United States to attack the Syrian government. But I'm speaking here about the sentiments of the people, regardless of their political affiliation.
Sure.
One more thing, and the refugee thing is a good example to point out what I'm saying. There are only 2 million refugees living outside Syria, while there are over 5 million IDPs, internally displaced people living inside Syria. 3.6 million of them are on direct government aid. So you would understand the scale of the problem. It's true, people are asking for more help from the United States of America, but at the same time, they don't want to see their country or their city destroyed because of this help. This is not the form of help they would request.
Sure, I
Regarding
understand
the
that.
levels of fear, yes. Regarding the levels of fear, there is anxiety on the street. I wouldn't call it fear. Let's bear in mind the people have been living in a war-torn country for the past 29 months. They're used to the concept of war, more or less. People who live in certain areas in Damascus, upscale areas actually, who live next to rebel-held areas, they're used to being bombed by mortars by the rebels all the time. So they have this mindset where they understand they might die anytime. I haven't seen, as an independent reporter and journalist, anyone who's sleeping outside in fear of an American strike. But as these threats, the American threats, escalate, as the strike seems more and more imminent, I don't know what will happen. But I would tell you that life in Damascus is going on as normal up till this moment. There are people on restaurants right now. There are people going out as we speak. But the fact remains there's a great deal of anxiety in the atmosphere right now.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Alaa Ebrahim, thank you very much for taking some time with us.
Thank you.
Now, here with us in New York is Syrian American community activist Sarab Aljijakli, did I get that right, of the National Alliance of Syria. And also joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Dan Layman. He is the spokesman for the Syrian Support Group, an advocacy organization for the Free Syrian Army. Welcome to both of you to Arise America. Thank you for taking some time.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get you, Sarab, to respond a little bit to what we just heard from Alaa. I have to say I was a bit surprised by his answer that the majority of Syrians inside the country don't want U.S. intervention. What's your response?
Well, I think the previous guest represents a certain specific point of view. He's able to operate because he represents state media and acts as a state propagandist for the regime. So he's going to provide a perspective that relates to a point of view most closest aligned with the regime. I think one of the things that's important to note is that regardless of where you are in Syria, there is fear. Obviously, there's fear. People have been living in a terrible situation for the past 30 months. However, 2/3 of the country is no longer under control of the regime and is under continuous collective punishment by the regime. So when we talk about airstrikes, when we talk about shelling, we're talking about 3/4 almost of the Syrian population who has either fled or is under daily regime bombardment at this point in time. So there is, for those people who are most desperate, a real hope, even if they are cynical, that some sort of change will occur with some sort of United States action.
Dan, let me bring you into this conversation. I think that particularly for Americans, we kind of lose track of what areas of Syria are under Assad control and what areas are under rebel control. Can you sort of give us a summary of what the political and the military situation is there right now?
Absolutely. So around Damascus, in the center of Damascus, the regime has most of the control, with the exception of the eastern suburbs. Most of the area that the rebels control, that's up in the rural northern areas north of Aleppo City, in addition to some portions of Aleppo City, continuing down into rural areas along the coast and some population centers as well. And then you have the extremists primarily that control the oil fields over in Hasaka province, over in eastern Syria. Really, it just looks like a checkerboard around many of the population concentrations, like Aleppo, like Homs, areas of Damascus, Deraa down in the south. It's very complicated.
Dan, let me also ask you this while I'm talking to you. According to the context that you have, and I know you represent a support group for the Free Syrian Army, how does this look from the Syrian point of view? The president said that there would be a red line. He kind of, backed away from that, and then finally it looked like he was ramping up toward military intervention, and then stopped in the middle of that and said, "Let me get congressional support." And now perhaps it might even be delayed any further. From the rebel point of view, how has that been playing in Syria?
Well, I tell you what, not very well. There have been a number of last chances that we have heard from the rebel military command that the Obama administration has to get behind the moderate opposition. One of those last chances, for example, was back in the fall when the U.S. had not yet provided significant financial support. Another last chance was after the first chemical attack in Khan al-Assal, and then also in the outskirts of Damascus. A third was after the Obama administration agreed to provide weapons, and then those have not yet materialized except from other international backers like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This, I think, is the pinnacle of last chances. 1,400 people dead immediately, over 110,000 dead throughout the conflict. If we don't show right now that we can get behind substantially the moderate opposition, I don't think we'll have further opportunities in the future.
Sarab, if the U.S. does in fact launch this airstrike, there will surely be collateral damage, whether we mean to or not. What does that do to our image, not only in Syria, but in that region of the country, of the world, rather?
Well, I think the United States image has taken a lot of hits, namely due to foreign policy of last decade and beyond. So that doesn't change anything. I think what happens today in terms of inaction, however, will result in really empowering and emboldening Assad to further commit the crimes against humanity that he is conducting. I think the impression from the general populace regarding the United States in terms of their action or inaction will be negative because of this fact that they've allowed this to continue you for so long. And I think that's, at the end of the day, what is painfully evident to so many Syrians.
You know what? It's been said over these last several days that there is a need for approval by the UN Security Council to go in. Otherwise, it's illegal for the U.S. to do it. Some have interpreted the law to say so. Is the help for the rebellion, for the civil war, more important than obeying what has already been considered international law and norm?
Well, the last time I checked, killing 100,000 people is against international law. Utilizing chemical weapons against
I
your
know,
own
I
populace
understand that, but
against
just
international
quote
law.
my grandmother, 2 wrongs don't make it right. The U.S. is going to have to own what it does or doesn't do.
Oh, sure, sure. And right now it's owning the fact that they've had a policy of inaction over the last 2.5 years that has led to the fragmentation of Syria, because it's emboldened Assad and their allies to this point. So you're right, they are owning up exactly today, but unfortunately it's the Syrian people who are paying that price.
And Dan, is it your estimation that this very limited airstrike is going to be enough? What do we accomplish with it?
Well, it depends on what we target. Initially, the Obama administration said they would take out Assad's ability to deploy his chemical weapons. Afterwards, they expanded that to include other military capabilities as well. If the U.S. government strikes targets such as airfields, control towers, fuel resupply for jets to limit the regime's ability to run air sorties, if they destroy their artillery positions, basically getting rid of their ability to bombard cities, which has been the primary regime tactic in lieu of sending in soldiers, and if they get rid of command and control centers. So, for example, you take out Maher al-Assad, the command of the 4th Armored Division, and some of those bigger combat divisions that Assad has deployed, I think that is probably the best thing that can be done to change the balance of power in favor of the rebels on the ground.
Dan Layman, thank you very much for your time. We do appreciate it. Sarab Aljijakli, it's always good to see you. Thank you
very much for having me.
It is time now to take a look at the news capturing headlines around the globe in our Arise News World Wrap.